Hello. Welcome to the Fireside Chats with me, Isaac Childres, creator of Gloomhaven and all sorts of fun stuff. And I'm so happy that you're joining us today for a talk by the Fireside, which today is just my phone taped up against the glass of the fireplace. Um, I don't know what happened to my iPad. I couldn't find it this afternoon, so this is what we're stuck with: the roaring flames of my phone. But yeah, thanks so much for joining us again. We have got some exciting special guests today. The designers of Buttons and Bugs, which we'll talk to a little later. But first, what else do I want to talk about? I'm not quite sure. My son is out taking a walk right now, so he's not. He might be coming by later to disrupt things, so that'll be exciting. And I don't know. It was kind of a chill weekend, chill couple days here. Nothing. I don't know. Just last week was so chaotic with like the launch of Buttons and Bugs and everything. It's been kind of nice these past few days to just not have so much work to do. Though there is still lots that needs to get done. And writing an update every day, let me tell you, that's exhausting. But it's good to just keep everybody informed about what's going on. Yeah, we had like a bunch of great streams yesterday and today. Nikki was playing Buttons and Bugs earlier. Um, and what else? Oh, I did want to highlight we had a stream with foretellers voice actors that happened at noon today that I somehow missed in my schedule and didn't mention in the update this morning either. So be sure to check that out. So you can find it on this Twitch stream, or it'll be uploaded to YouTube pretty soon. Yeah, so like highly talented voice actors getting together and talking about Gloomhaven. So if that sounds interesting to you, be sure to check that out. And then pretty soon after this fireside at 6 tonight, so in a couple hours, I'll just be playing Gloomhaven Digital with Brandbeard Gaming, which is always a lot of fun. I jump on their streams occasionally, and it'll be fun to do that while the campaign is live. And yeah, we got tomorrow we've got kind of a fun little announcement for the miniatures that's coming up. Nothing like super exciting, but should be interesting to some people. So stay tuned for that tomorrow. And yeah, I don't got too much else to talk about. If there's I don't know if there's any questions in the chat, feel free to hit me up. I want to know how I can make your life better. So yeah, if there's some way I can do that, let me know. um you can think about that while I bring on our guests. So let's do that. Let's bring in Joe and Nikki and talk about Gloomhaven Buttons and Bugs. Welcome, Nikki. Welcome, Joe. How are you
Thanks.
guys?
Hello. Doing great. Thanks for having us.
I'm jealous of your roaring fire there.
Thank you. Yes, I am jealous of it too. It's just so roaring. I wish I could be that roaring. um, yeah. I mean, first off, I just kind of want to touch base with the two of you, see how this last week has gone for you. I think we announced Buttons and Bugs on Wednesday, so I imagine it's been a bit of a hectic week for you as well. Just all the hype, lots of hype, and playing the games on stream and everything else. How are you both feeling?
Yeah, it's been quite a few things gone. It's only been a week already. It's not even a week.
Yeah.
I believe we're at what? Are we over 10,000 copies of Buttons and Bugs.
Yeah, I think we hit that today.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
It's pretty cool. It seems like people are really interested in it, so that's good.
Yeah, it felt like a busy week. It was fun to stream. It was fun to Isaac and I we did like a double header where we streamed and we each played a scenario, and that was a lot of fun. So yeah,
For sure.
I enjoy watching people play the game. I like playing the game, and then I enjoy watching and just kind of being an armchair critic and and
Yeah.
seeing their decision. It's easier almost to watch and to make decisions that way when you're not like in the spotlight.
For sure. You get to kind of see some of the things that they might have missed. Or you go, oh, I would have done this thing. And then they've like totally outplayed you.
Oh
They do
yeah.
something, you're just like, oh, never mind.
I see why they did
My plan was bad.
that.
I don't know
But
what I
no,
was thinking.
For me this week, it's been super fun to like just see it popping up, articles and on Reddit, and people seem really excited about it. Like that's been a lot of fun for me. Is people are like, oh, what is this? Who does the cartoon that Ross shared in the Discord? That was funny. Where it's
semi-co-op.
Yeah, where they did the math on like it's either been the biggest or the smallest Gloomhaven product to date every time you release something, and so then they did the math on like, okay, what's reverse of how small Buttons and Bugs is, and it was Gigantor. Some big ridiculous sized box needs to come next.
Yeah, we just keep oscillating, and we've oscillated so far to the small side. We're gonna just go crazy with the next one.
The
That's not
pendulum
true.
is
By the way.
gaining
We're not
momentum.
gonna be doing that. I don't ever want to make anything as big as Frosthaven, though I did say the same thing after I made Gloomhaven.
Well, you don't have to
And
make the
then-
same thing that's as big as Frosthaven. You can just make something bigger.
Well, yeah, I don't want to do that either. we almost hit like some upper limits on shipping that would have cost us a lot of money. So probably best not to dance that dance. But anyway. But Buttons and Bugs is much simpler because it's so small. Shipping is cheap. It's great. Now I understand why people make small games.
How many Buttons and Bugs can we fit inside of a Gloomhaven box? Do we know?
Great question. We could do the math on this. I think this is what the viewers really want.
The viewers love math. Everyone loves math. That's the best thing.
Well, Isaac probably knows the volume of the Gloomhaven box. Off the top of his head.
No, you'd be surprised at what I don't know. Yeah, I don't know the dimensions off the top of my head, at least, of either Gloomhaven or Frosthaven.
All right, you know what?
I mean, there's a copy right over there. I could get some tape measure and measure it. That would be an exciting stream, I imagine.
Off-screen measuring the box.
Off-screen measuring the box. That's the best stream you can have.
Has there been anything surprising about any of the reactions to the announcement that you found?
That's an interesting question. Let's see.
I know sometimes you'll see the comment of, and I've seen this before with small games. They're like, "Oh, I'm going to pay half as much in shipping as the thing cost me," and I'm always surprised to see that. I'm like, "Yeah, that's what shipping a $15 product costs. It costs like $7." Like, I don't get what the complaint is. But yeah, I feel like I've seen that a lot. Like, "Oh, the shipping relative to the thing." But yeah, it's just how shipping works, I think.
Yeah. Probably compared to the like inbox store kind of a deal. Like you're not paying shipping when you're just buying a game off of the shelf.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it just surprises people to learn sometimes that shipping is expensive, and it is only getting
more expensive.
Yeah. That's the nature of physical products. We should make video games.
We could make video games. You know, I came from video games.
Yeah, I feel like we've got the pedigree sitting right here.
How many copies of Buttons and Bugs do we need to sell before we do a mobile version of Buttons and Bugs?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I saw
there could be something there.
A comment today. Some guy was like, "Yeah, I'm a developer. I'm just working on my own personal, like, little app of Buttons and Bugs." He said, "Yeah, some people can just
Gloomhaven
rip stuff."
fans, they're on this. They got things to do. We got expansions for the game that's not released. Those got to get made. Everyone's got things going on here.
Well, that's another thing. I feel like have you guys seen, like, everyone's like, oh, you know how easy it's going to be to expand this with fan content? Like just a poker-sized card, 20 cards, you've got a whole new campaign.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's been a lot of talk about like fan rule sets for how to do it multiplayer as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's an interesting question too, of like, what's the question? It's just, what is there more Buttons and Bugs in you? Like, are you, like, how easy would it be, do you feel, to, like, create more characters or create more scenarios? Sorry if this is putting you on the spot, but
I mean, we haven't gotten to see my favorite characters. I know a lot of people really like the Tinker and the Cragheart and the Spellweaver, especially. We've got a lot of love for them. But I mean, where's my bear friend? Where's my Plague Boy?
Yeah. I remember at some point, like, I think, like, during this, or at the beginning of this, like, latest development pass, where we kind of changed a lot of things, you were feeling that, like, the design space was a little small. Like, you weren't sure, like, how many, like,
sure, you're
you know,
asking,
like how do we do the Tinker, or like how do we do the Cragheart, like, without, like, being able to destroy obstacles and stuff. And you figured out ways to do that, which I think work really well.
Yeah, I think we landed on some really good ways to make them still feel like the characters that they are in the big Gloomhaven. And I think we can continue to find ways to do that if that's something that Cephalofair is going to do, is make more of these small box campaigns. We could definitely find ways to make these characters. And I mean, as the fans are clearly aware, we can make tons of scenarios. That's not really a limiting factor.
Yeah,
I
like
think, oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
I do think that it would be nice to kind of get a little bit more design space in some of it. That is one of the things with these small games, is that when you try to keep them as streamlined and concise as possible, you do lose a lot of the design hooks that you have to kind of expand on or explore further. I think there is still quite a bit of depth in the system that we can explore, but we'll definitely, if we do more of these products, we would want to, expand on the system a little bit here and there to kind of fill out the design space.
Well, so philosophical question to, like, you two designers. Do you feel like it's a zero-sum game between components, like how many and how large and how much components you have, and like the design space and how streamlined you can keep the rules? Because to me, it's like, the more you try to streamline and keep the components at a minimum, how you reintroduce depth is almost, you have to add rules overhead in lieu of components, and that's precisely what we don't want to do. And that's maybe one thing that, I don't know, Nikki, if that's one thing you were getting at, is you almost have to add in some more components if you want to kind of expand that design space a little more.
Not necessarily. I actually have a pretty good answer for this
Okay.
kind of question, locked and loaded, because I get asked it a lot actually.
Beautiful.
I'm really interested to hear what Isaac has to say about that first, since I know what my stock answer is already.
Sorry, I was a little distracted by the baby coming in and being a little upset. So yeah, sorry, could you repeat the question?
Do you feel like it's a zero-sum game between how many components you have and how streamlined you can make the game in terms of like rule set? Because it feels like the more you shrink the components to reintroduce depth or complexity, you have to like introduce rules and like fiddliness, and that's the kind of the line we have to walk with a
Yeah.
micro game like this.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's definitely not zero sum. I mean, like, you know, like, I mean, Gloomhaven itself is, you know, we didn't figure it out, but it's like, you know, 100 times bigger than Buttons and Bugs or whatever, right? But that doesn't mean that Buttons and Bugs has like 1/100th of the depth of Gloomhaven. I mean, I think it's, well, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of factors in there in terms of like all the extra campaign elements and stuff. But I mean, like, it's I'd say Buttons and Bugs is still like has a lot of depth there. Now, yeah, it might not have quite as much depth, but I think that balance is struck pretty well in the amount of cards we have versus the amount of depth we were able to get out of them. But yeah, if we, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, and just like take the concept of like a new character of like, you know, adding like 8 more cards, you know, to create another character. Yeah, I mean, I think those cards are a canvas, if you will, you know, where I mean, you can do whatever you want, and that is your design space that I think you can. I think there's plenty of untapped ways to explore that. I was kind of surprised myself when I saw one of the Mind Thief cards, right, which had like retaliate like with poison attached to it, you know, so it was like your retaliate is not only doing damage but it's providing a condition to the thing that attacks you as well, and that's like something I'd never considered in a Gloomhaven game before, and that like didn't require extra components or something. It was just like, yeah, there's an extra icon on that card and it makes perfect sense what it does, and it just like opens up like a whole new world. So I don't know. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but those are my off the cuff thoughts about it. But yeah, I want to hear what Nikki has to say.
Yeah, I like that, Isaac. I'm interested in what Nikki has as well.
I love hearing Isaac talk about design stuff because we aim for a lot of similar play experiences, but Isaac's method of design is so much different than mine, and it's really interesting to just watch two different minds that act very differently, like approaching the same target. It's really cool to me. I'm a big nerd about all of this. So something that I like to talk about with game design and complexity, I may have even mentioned this to you, Joe, at one point during, like, while we were designing stuff, is I tend to think of complexity as like a limited resource. Like, it is a component of the game that you have to keep track of as a designer, where all of the rules overhead that we're talking about, the different things that players have to keep in their mind when they're playing the game, all of these different types of complexity, they're not unlimited. You can't just make the game infinitely complex because you're going to hit the limit of what your players are able to learn or comprehend or keep track of at one time. So there's not like just it's not an infinite resource that you can work with. You have to kind of keep track of it as a designer and know what you're working with. So in terms of like how our components and the rules overhead and the strategic depth kind of all interrelated to each other, there is a lot of that. Like you were talking about does reducing the number of components mean that we have to have more rules overhead in order to have more design space? And I don't think it's necessarily the case. It's like design space is more a factor of what the mechanics are and how they interrelate to each other, in the same way that Isaac was just talking about. Of it's really easy for us to just slap an icon onto another icon, and suddenly we've created new design space without having to cost components. And like there's a little bit of rules overhead there. Like there isn't a rule in Gloomhaven that says a retaliate can even apply a condition. So like sure, there's an amount of rules overhead there that makes that happen. But like when you already understand attack applies condition, and then you see like the exact same iconography for retaliate applies condition, it's so similar to a complexity that you've already learned and understood that it's much less expensive to essentially apply that extra design space, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's players only have so much like RAM, you know. You can only keep so much in your mind at once, which is what a lot of players live for. Like I feel like Gloomhaven players, they're sort of, I mean, they're Euro players who like fantasy and they like the setting. It feels like, and so they like that challenge. But there's a limit for everyone, and also you don't want people like that's one thing, Nikki, that I think Isaac mentioned, that sort of shift we did. That's one thing that we took we opened up players' RAM, I guess, like their working memory, by tracking more things on the board and making them remember fewer things going on.
Exactly.
And so then we could open up some new systems and add complexity in other places. I'm realizing your complexity theory and how it works in real time. Like we played with the same amount of mental overhead. We diverted it to places that were more fun. Like you weren't just having to remember things. You got to interact with the system using that memory.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's one of the big reasons. I guess most people aren't necessarily aware. We did a fairly large redesign of the system, because we originally started with something that was much closer to Gloomholden, the play in hand style of microgame. But we've switched it now to what we've been showing on stream, where it's essentially just very close to the Gloomhaven experience, but small. And what that essentially allowed us to do is a lot of things that had to be tracked a certain way or basically remembered by the player when they were playing in hand, we got to kind of pull those things out of the player's memory, and we can put them on the table. So like monsters' positions and player position, and the health that the player and the monsters have, all of these different things. We had very clever ways to track them previously, and Gloomholden has very clever ways to track them, but they do require an amount of like memory from the player to just kind of keep those things in mind. But I think one of the other things, aside from just storing variables for a short period of time, the other thing that this change really did for us was making the way that you interact with the game and the enemies is more intuitive now than it was. It made sense how we had it before, but like it wasn't the immediate expectations that players had for how a grid-based tactical game would work. Whereas now it's much closer to that. You can look at the components and you can look at your card and you can see, oh, I can move and I can attack. And like even if you've never played Gloomhaven before, you probably have a good understanding of like what moving around on a grid and being able to attack something looks like. So by having those mechanics just being more intuitive and more streamlined like that, that also frees up a lot of what we're talking about, of this like player complexity that they have to keep track of, because they don't have to like dedicate memory also to how to play the game, like how to move or how to engage with a monster. That's just kind of a smaller rules file that they get to hold in their head. Is just, oh, you just move your cube and you roll a die.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, oh yeah, a lot of times I'm not thinking about designing games that way, but I think it's definitely like very valuable to do so. And so I'm glad that we have Nikki on board to think about ways to reduce player RAM, or at least like allocate that RAM towards doing fun things as opposed to bookkeeping things. I know like a lot of times I'll just talk to people about like playing Gloomhaven, and they consider like the app that like keeps track of all the monsters and stuff like essential to the game. And I tell them like I've never used the app because like I don't know, I guess I like enjoy all that like minutia of like how the monsters move and when they act and all that stuff and all that bookkeeping. And then people think I'm crazy. So yeah, it's kind of funny sometimes I think about like, I don't know, how successful Gloomhaven was, even though I wasn't thinking about stuff like that. And anyway, but yeah, but I'm glad that the app exists so that people can use it if they need to, at least for normal Gloomhaven. I don't know, maybe there'll be a buttons and bugs app, or like you said, we'll just make a handheld version of the game.
I mean, if it is a mobile game, just imagine that. Like, you could just pull out Gloomhaven on your phone on like the morning commute or something. Well, not if you're driving, but if you're on a bus or a train, that is. Don't play Gloomhaven while you're driving, please.
But you could maybe.
I mean, I've played on my phone in browser on screen top. It's not great.
Yeah,
but
screen top is a little goofy no matter where you're playing it, but
a little tough on mobile, but
yeah, as Miss Felly Music says, if you have a functional public transit system, if you don't live in the United States, you can play Gloomhaven on your commute.
Yeah.
I feel like when I like listen to content about Gloomhaven, it seems like at least early on, or maybe before the app, like the Dark Ages. I don't know when the app first came out, but it seems like there's typically at least one player like Isaac in a group who sort of enjoys the upkeep and kind of runs the monsters and maybe the elements, and I don't mind that stuff either. I don't know. I like taking games out and putting them away, especially if there's like an organizer. And there's people who hate that, and I kind of like it, and so I might be one of those people as well.
I very much dislike the the setup and breakdown of board games. So a lot of the games that I keep around are very small, and I think about the setup times of my games a lot when I'm designing them. So like the ability for buttons and bugs that if you want to play a scenario, you're essentially just like, okay, put this card down, put a couple of cubes on it, pick cards, you're ready to go. It's nice and fast and easy. But the other part of it, the other part of the complexity of Gloomhaven that you're talking about, of the like managing all the monsters and all that part I don't mind as much either. Though I've usually only played Gloomhaven with just one other person. We just play 2-player. And we're both that way. So we end up kind of like sharing the load a little bit. He would tend to be doing like all of the damage and conditions on monsters, but I would be doing all of their activations and like where they moved and everything. And that, I don't know. Yeah. I've never been too overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that's happening in a Gloomhaven game. But then again, I'm also a very strong like approval of just house ruling anything. So I mean, we're not even playing with like half the rules in Gloomhaven. We're playing with basically just the action card system and how the monsters work, and then everything else we're just house ruling.
So I'm like super neurotic about getting the rules right, and I've watched just how quickly you do monster activations, Nikki, and I'm like, but have we like counted the hexes? Like, are we sure that? And you're just like, zoop zoop zoop. That makes sense. But
I mean, that part. That's the beauty of hex grid. They're really easy
Yeah.
to count. You just go, oh, 2 spaces, there it is, done.
Goes quick.
I don't know. That part's always been easy. The spatial processing has always been the really easy part for me. So I've never had a trouble with moving the monsters around really quickly and just kind of resolving their activations. I think that's probably why I'm the one that ends up doing that when we play, because I just look at the list and I just go, okay, and then just move all the monsters and just like their attacks go. We're complete opposites in regards to the rules. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
you like
enjoying
setup and breakdown, and I hate that. And then I like moving all the things around really quickly, and you're just like, oh wait, hold on.
We would be, well, in some ways we'd be symbiotic players. In other ways we'd probably drive each other nuts.
Yeah. You can do all the setup for us, and then I'll just run the monsters.
There you go. I'm liking these comments. So, Miss Valley, I enjoy the bookkeeping stuff, but I have ADHD, so certain things just fall out of my brain. That is the language for it. That's the working memory we're talking about, and that's I can relate to that. Like I mean, the thing about Gloomhaven and Buttons and Bugs, I mean, Buttons and Bugs even kind of zeroes in on it more because just your play area is smaller and you have fewer cards. Is the complexity is mostly in your hands. You know, most of the AP is sifting through your hand, looking at the board. And so it's not like a big Euro where it's like, oh, I could go this space, this space, this space, and or I can move up this track. I like how the complexity is there, and there's a lot of like cascading effects of if I do X, Y, and Z, then whatever happens. But it's all right in front of you for the most part. Like, yeah, there's the map and the cards, but usually my faces and my cards. And that's one thing that I do enjoy about Buttons and Bugs for me, because I'm the same way. I can't keep too many things in my head at once, and I like how we're limited to the 4 cards, or we limited ourselves to the 4 cards for each character. And so if I'm feeling overwhelmed by my decision, or I'm getting AP, I've only got ever 4 cards maximum. Like, I'm not sifting through a bunch and worrying about planning too far ahead that way.
Yeah, and that was a decision that we even talked about, and at one point decided, like, do we want to keep the AB sides of the cards like Gloomhaven had, or do we want to go to not having that, like Gloomhaven, and have an 8-card hand? And the double-sided cards add a really unique level of strategy that isn't present in Big Gloomhaven. But also, yeah, like you're talking about, if you only have 4 cards at most to look at any point in time, which hopefully really helps that problem of analysis paralysis and makes it easier to, choose between your very finite options.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say Buttons and Bugs for me, like, just felt refreshing, like in the smaller decision space. It's not like a big scenario of Gloomhaven where you've got to keep track of all 4 characters and what they're doing, and there's like a million monsters on the board. You've got to figure out how each one interacts with each of your characters and figure out the best way to get in there and do the most damage and take the least amount of damage. And like, that's all there in Buttons and Bugs, but it's just all over on a smaller scale that still feels good to play. But yeah, like the decision space is smaller, and so you're getting the same thing, but it's just, it doesn't feel as, I don't want to say like overwhelming, but just like as taxing on your brain, right? It's just, it's just easier to play, which is refreshing. And I think that's
for sure
kind of what we've been talking about here the whole time, is just yeah, it takes less RAM, which is nice.
Yeah, it's also because each individual scenario is shorter, you can kind of more easily take breaks. You don't have to
Yeah.
like if you wanted to play a scenario of this straight through without getting distracted, it's only going to be 15 minutes, so it's pretty easy to do that. But
Yeah.
if you want to do the same thing with a big Gloomhaven scenario, you might be there for significantly longer to do some of those scenarios, and having your brain just on and running and trying to keep track of things for whatever it is, 50 minutes straight or whatever. I don't know how long a Gloomhaven. I've played hundreds of Gloomhaven scenarios. I don't know how long they are.
I mean, typically a couple hours. Yeah.
But yeah, like having your brain just on and having to run and keep track of things and process things for that amount of time is definitely a lot more tiring versus being able to just play 15 minutes and then it's okay to get distracted after that because you're not in the middle of a thing. You don't have to remember anything. And like even as you're setting up for the next scenario, you still have time in between, like, okay, look at the scenario, you can look at the monsters, you can kind of process them, you can pick up your new ability cards, your items, and you have that time and space to kind of breathe in between the scenarios. So even if you played Big Gloomhaven and you played Buttons and Bugs for like, let's say you played both of these for 3 hours, your brain is on and active and engaged for a longer period, like a longer percentage of that 3 hours if you're playing Gloomhaven than if you're playing Bugs and Buttons, I think, because you get to kind of like oscillate between different types of things that you're looking at more often in Buttons and Bugs.
Like sprints.
Yeah.
With rest. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's also like a big social component to that as well, right? I mean, like playing Gloomhaven is like an event, right? You got to get your group together. You got to carve out, like you said, like 3 hours of time, and yeah, just get together just to play like a single scenario. Whereas this, yeah, like if you got 15 free minutes, like just have fun, right? Which I think is just so much more convenient and yeah, it's great.
Have you all seen any reactions or the community embracing the solo thing? Because that's one thing that that I like about it. When I like solo gaming, and I'm one of those that doesn't necessarily like to play multi-handed, and then that's there again is a lot of information. You got to, if you're playing two different hands, that's a lot to kind of field. And which nice for me, like I totally forget what my other hand was doing, so it's sort of like I'm playing co-op with myself. But like I really enjoy the solo only aspect of it, and I'm kind of expecting that it's going to be really embraced by the solo community, which I feel like sort of revealed itself during the pandemic. I feel like a lot of people who didn't know they enjoyed solo gaming sort of figured out that, oh, this is fun. And then there's a lot of solo only games that have come out in the past couple of years. So I'm kind of hoping that it gets embraced by that community and just sort of takes off that direction.
Yeah, it would definitely be really nice. The solo games, the difference between solo and co-op games is always a bit. There's always some amount of tension from player bases. Since I make almost only co-op games, but not many of them have been single player, I actually get a lot of feedback from people of like, hey, can you make solo variants for your games? Or like, the next co-op game are you going to make? Is it going to be solo playable and stuff like that? So it's definitely a lot of push for those solo games and solo experiences. But it's also a very split audience. Like we have already seen a number of people commenting on Buttons and Bugs, wanting it to be 2-player or even 4-player. That it's just one of those things. Like you're never really going to be able to please everyone. So like we specifically set out here to make a solo experience, and we streamlined the system to work very well for that type of experience specifically.
Yeah. And I think you just have to take it as a compliment, right? I mean, like,
Yeah,
people
that's
want to
true.
play your stuff, right? And yeah, if they can only play it, if they only have the opportunity to play games solo and your game isn't solo, I mean, yeah, that's sad for them, but there's other games to play, I think. And so yeah, the opposite is true. I mean, yeah, if you want to play multiplayer Gloomhaven, obviously there's Gloomhaven, there's Jaws of the Lion. It's not exactly the same as Buttons and Bugs, but yeah, I mean the very nature of Buttons and Bugs is, yeah, very intrinsically tied to it being a solo game, and so that's just what it is.
Yeah, and I definitely get that. Like, I've seen a lot of that push for the solo games because I've gotten a lot of the players of my games, asking me for solo variants and things like that. And I didn't until like the last couple of years, I didn't really see the I don't want to say the value in it, because people like different things, but I didn't see the as much draw as there was to it. I don't really tend to play board games on my own. I'm not a solo gamer. I'm the opposite of Joe in this respect again, where like usually if I'm going to a board game over a video game or even just reading something, I tend to want to do that as a social experience. So that's why I tend toward co-op games when I'm designing myself. But clearly, there is a lot of those players that they don't get as many opportunities to play with a group, or they have a lot more time available to themselves that's just their time where they would like to play a solo game. But we've also been seeing with Buttons and Bugs here, because we've been getting a lot of people that are asking, is there a 2-player version of this? It's very clear that they're in a situation where the person that they play with often is like their spouse or something like that, where it's the person who is in your immediate space, who you do have access to every day of your life, and you want to share an experience together.
Yeah.
And this is such a small and easy experience to be able to just set up and play and get kind of that strategic depth of Gloomhaven that is a lot harder to get in a small amount of time from the bigger Gloomhaven games. Like I understand the desire for a 2-player version of this.
Did your head, even for a second, Nikki, try to work on, well, how do I convert this to 2-player? Did you let your head go there? Okay.
No, I'm specifically not letting myself go there, because I'll get into it and then it'll be a whole thing.
Yeah.
And
well, we'll all wake up tomorrow, because okay, I want to tell a quick story about how Nikki can get in these like design streaks and just solve problems that seemed unsolvable. Because I've been wanting to tell a story about, because I know what's going to happen if you get like hooked onto that. You're gonna like latch onto it, and we're all going to wake up tomorrow morning and Nikki's going to be like, I solved it. I stayed up all night and I solved it, because this happened with the Spellweaver. I don't know if this was as impactful to you as it was to me, but it was fun for me, because I think I made like drafts of most of the characters, and you took them and like tweaked them and updated them and played with them, and you're like, hey Joe, I'm going to work on the Spellweaver this week, and I was like, cool. And I didn't hear from you on it for a couple of days. I think in the Discord one morning you were like, so I stayed up all night and I did a whole bunch of hard math, but the Spellweaver is singing like a bird now, and it's awesome. I was like, great, show it to me. And yeah, it's just it's fun to so yeah, if we get you hooked onto some task like that, we just better be prepared for it to actually happen.
I think we're a little bit late in the game to just have me be like, all right, we're redesigning the whole game again.
Yeah, we did that once. That was stressful enough.
We've been there, done that. We don't need to do that again.
It's a scary road. It's a fun road. It's a scary one.
Yeah, on the Spellweaver specifically, that was kind of the moment that I went from appreciating the design of Gloomholden to loving the design of Gloomholden. Because like I was looking at Gloomholden, I was looking how we like what we can do to it and make it more accessible. This was very early on in the design of this, and just thinking about like what things, like how do certain things work and how do certain things feel to play, and like what are the good play experiences and what are the kind of like not great things that can happen in the game that we want to try to steer players away from. And Lost Cards was one of those things that felt really hard to just like wrap my brain around how we wanted it to work in this game, because the nature of only having 4 cards and having them be double-sided means when you lose a card, you're actually losing 2. And I'm the type of player who in Gloomhaven, I just never used loss actions to begin with. Like I think the only time I actually played a character that I even bothered to use loss actions was the Tinkerer. But like any other time, I would always just look at the available cards and just be like, all right, well, I'm just not taking any of these ones, and just go from there, because I really valued the amount of time that I could get out of the characters. Like I think I've only run out of time in like one scenario in all of Gloomhaven, because I just value how much time you can get out of the characters' cards. So the idea of losing a card when it's a double-sided card and it's worth 2 of your very finite amount of stamina, like I looked at the math and I was like, well, if you only have 4 cards, like you take 4 turns, you rest, you get 3 turns, you rest, you get 2 turns, and then you're done. So you only have 9 active turns in a scenario to begin with. It's a very little amount of time. But if you use a loss action in your first rest cycle, you're down to 2 cards. In your second rest cycle, you only get 2 turns, and then you're out of cards. So using a loss action in that first rest cycle, it costs you 3 of your 9 turns. And I was like, that's way too expensive in order to like get a loss effect. Like that effect would have to be unhingedly strong in order to actually
kill all
be
the
worth.
monsters.
Yeah, it's like I've got a screen wipe that I can just play. It's not. So the Spellweaver is like why we're talking about this, is because the Spellweaver's kit is a lot of loss actions and reviving ether that can get your lost cards back. And that was such a big like identity piece of what the Spellweaver was in Gloomhaven. And we saw this when you were working on Gloomholden and making extra characters from Gloomholden. Fans of the original Spellweaver, they told you that like it has to have that effect. Like it's so important that that's a thing that character does. And actually, we even see that in 2.0 as well. Like it's been made even more clear that like, hey, this is your pivotal piece of mechanics for this character.
Yeah.
So I was trying to figure out how do we make lost cards usable and feel good still, and then get them back with this card. And what I ended up doing, actually my partner helped me a lot with this one, because we were just like brainstorming things and trying really weird stuff. And my partner has this great knack for just like saying a thing that sounds like the weirdest, like it doesn't make any sense. And like half the time she's like doesn't even want to say the actual thing that she's thinking, because she's just like, oh, that's a stupid idea, I don't want to say that. But like she'll say a thing and I'm just gonna be like, oh wait, what if we do this? And it'll like just spark this whole design tunnel that I go down. So like for the Spellweaver, the real trick to it was I realized if we want to make reviving ether viable, we have to get as much value out of it as possible, which means every other card that the Spellweaver has needs to have a loss action on it somewhere, so that we can get 3 cards back with that card. And then realizing, well, the card is only lost after you've used it, and reviving ether is going to be on a top or a bottom action. which means we actually needed a diversity of top and bottom action loss cards so that you could lose a card, because you have to play 2 cards in a turn. So you have to lose a card first and then use Reviving Ether to even get 3 cards back to begin with and get the most out of that card. And like that combined with trying to figure out where on those cards those loss actions go basically got me to there's a specific skill rotation that you can do with the Spellweaver at level 1 and at higher levels that you can specifically just like use a loss action every single round, like 1 or 2 loss actions every single round until you hit the Reviving Ether, and then you just pick up all 3 cards immediately. And it takes you like 3 or 4 rounds to get to that point, but then you have 3 cards back in your hand. Well, that's the equivalent of if you had rested, but you didn't have to spend a turn resting, and you got to, over the course of those 3 to 4 turns, use a loss action every single turn. So like suddenly I like was able to pull all of these disparate pieces of how this game could work together and just be like, oh, there's like this really specific way that it can fit together and it feels really, really good to use. And then the rest of the time you have to be like really cautious about how you're using your loss actions and like what you're doing with them. So there's you can do that where you can just go off and just use a loss action every single turn. Or you could try not to use your loss actions and only discard cards and lose cards to rest. And then at the very last moment, when you get down to that, like you're on your last of the 9 possible turns that you could have had without losing any cards, then you can use a loss action on that other card that isn't Reviving Ether, and then use Reviving Ether and get those 3 cards back. And now you've gotten to take 9 turns, and then you still have 3 cards in your hand again. And it's like, oh, it could also just like have a lot more longevity than the other characters, but you were probably using like basic attacks along the way, so you weren't necessarily getting a lot done, but it gives it a lot of flexibility of what that character is capable of doing. And because that was such an early character that I wanted to try to solve to figure out how can it even exist in this system, seeing the mechanical depths that the AB side cards have and the like ways that we can actually like just design into the system ways to do these things, that's what really made me fall in love with the design of this game and like realize that all of the other characters, we could find these really cool ways for this to happen as well.
Yeah. Well, I think now we definitely have to play the Spellweaver on the next stream.
Yeah. So see if you can, if I don't know if it's going to be me or one of you, but see if we can figure out what that skill rotation is. So you can just use a loss action every single turn. And
see, the reason I like the Tinkerer is the opposite of like the kick down the door and blow everything up Spellweaver strategy you talked about. It's like I get to set up my little perimeter. I've got my Retaliate sitting over here. I've got my little trap set over here, and I can play it super conservatively. And I feel like my favorite way to look at the Spellweaver is the latter of the 2 ways. Very conservatively, chip away, kind of hang back, do a little Muhammad Ali like bob and weave, and just try to play it.
I am definitely the opposite. When I play the Spellweaver, I go for maximum damage and I use all of my lost cards immediately. And if there's anything left after that, then I'm just like, well, it better die to the loss actions that I'm going to use again, because I'm just going to keep using them.
I don't think there's another character that takes advantage of the element system as much as the Spellweaver. I was just checking them over.
Yeah, I think the Crag card is probably the next character who uses the elements a decent amount.
Yeah.
The Tinkerer, interestingly, has access to the most elements, but doesn't use them for anything within its own skill set. So there's actually a number of items that I've specifically put into the game that allow you to use elements for things as a way to interact with your own elements that you might not be using as often, and also to interact with the elements that the monsters have. Because I really like I really like in Big Gloomhaven how the elemental demons like will make different elements and use them for things, and you can interact with how they're doing things by using or making elements. So I was trying to figure out a way to put that into Buttons and Bugs, and allowing them to, infuse and spend elements to do different things. Really wanted me to push also having the characters intentionally having elements that they're not going to use, so that there's reasons for you to go and look at those items that want to spend elements. So I think everyone except for, like you said, the Spellweaver actually is using all of those elements a lot and has a lot of them. But everyone else has elements around that they don't always have a use for, or in some cases, they never have a use for within their own kits.
And not only is that like, oh, I have this thing that I don't really use other than, if I have an item that lets me use it. Sometimes that's a liability if you have a monster in the scenario and now you have to play defensively and avoid them getting use of that if you can.
Yeah, in the stream earlier today, we saw that too. The heroin infestation like got to muddle me at one point because I didn't have a way to use the earth that I had available. And that muddle was a pretty big deal. Like,
yeah, that's really cool. That, I mean, yeah, the element system is different than it is in Gloomhaven, but it still, provides some of those same tensions of like, I need to use this versus like I don't need to use this because of how it interacts with the monsters and everything.
I guess it's not that much of a spoiler. We've seen some of the art already, so players know that, for instance, we've got a fire demon at least coming up later in the campaign of Buttons and Bugs. So there are elemental demons later on, and they do use elements in very interesting ways. And how you choose to interact with that and either intercept those elements or try to spend them for yourself, or how which actions you choose to play to maybe try to get rid of your own elements so that they can't use them becomes a part of the strategy of the scenarios.
Yeah. Very cool. And we're coming up on 5:00 here, or at least Pacific time anyway. I don't know if there's any other questions in chats that we have here, or we can call it a day. Can wait a few minutes maybe. I heard Joe had a Gloomhaven joke for us.
No. I was saying you had to say a Gloomhaven joke, and then we all proceeded to use all of the puns we could come up with that were Gloomhaven related in the span of about a minute, and then we were washed up. That's all we had in the tank. So.
Okay, well, what I had said, I'll try to reconstruct a joke here. So, a crackheart walks into a bar and orders a bourbon on the rocks. I think you know where this is going. He gets some alcohol with ice in it, and then he gets real mad because he wanted real rocks. And that's the joke.
It just seems weirdly like either you've done that before or you just have a knack, Isaac. One of the two. Maybe it's the mic with the cord. I don't know, but you seem in your element.
Yeah, I'm a stand-up comedian here.
Fly by night comedian.
Isaac's gonna stop being a game designer and become a stand-up comedian here.
No.
We got the vibes.
All right. So Miss Valley Music is asking, what classes would Joe and I like to see buttonized? Oh. So like just from the Gloomhaven classes.
I mean, when the cards are already double-sided, how do you do the class in Gloomhaven? No, is it Frosthaven? Must be Frosthaven that has the double-sided card character.
Oh, the Geminate?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
We'd figure it out.
Oh yeah, I know. I know summons were a struggle, and yeah, I'm interested to see how like an actual like summon class, like the Bone Shaper or something even,
Sure.
could possibly work.
So I was thinking of a Jaws character. I was thinking of Hatchet. And
Ooh,
how
yeah.
would you abstractly handle the favorite card? I'm sure we'd think
Yeah.
of something, but how do you get as close as you can inside our system? Which those are the challenges that I would look forward to. That was the fun part. Is how do you make this? Okay, we can't do the actual thing. We don't have the component. How do we make this feel as much like
Yeah.
the
How do we
big game?
make the Cragheart feel like the Cragheart when we
Yeah.
can't place and destroy obstacles and things like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Hatchet is kind of that one seems like fan favorite too. I think that one would be fun to see.
Yeah, I mentioned the Plague Herald and the what's the new name of Bear Friend? Wild Fury.
Yeah.
A wild furry appears.
Wild
Um,
fairy.
those were like two of my favorites in Gloomhaven. I guess you do end up with the interesting like that one's just a pet class. So like, do you actually have two minis for it in this?
Yeah,
Or,
you'd
like,
need
what
some extra
happens with it?
components there. Yeah.
I mean, the summons in, like, there are technically summons in buttons and bugs. We just simplified them mechanically to be
Resistant abilities.
persistent abilities with retaliate and shield, which basically came from like what is the purpose of this effect in
Right.
the character's kit, and it was like, well, it needs to soak damage. The Mind Thief is very squishy. We need a rat swarm in here that can soak some damage. What does that look like? And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I guess that's just shield, isn't it?
Yeah, works pretty well.
I think the real question is, it's not a rat swarm. Like, that's what it's supposed to be thematically in Gloomhaven. But when you're already smaller than a mouse, what is your swarm? Is it just a bunch of fleas? Like, what do you guess?
I mean, maybe you brought your rat swarm with you, so it also got miniaturized, and so now they're just like really, really tiny rats.
It was in your pocket. Yeah.
Just
When
the
you got
tiny
shrunk.
rats that live in your pocket?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe they're fleas or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
There might need to be some thematic compromises, but we'd get there.
There's already swarms of tiny bugs elsewhere in the game. The heroinist infestation is
Tardigrade swarm.
Yeah.
it's just a swarm of bugs wearing a mouse like a trench coat.
Yeah.
Just particularly
I'm seeing
horrifying.
Tardigrade swarm in the
Oh,
chat. Are
tardigrade
those
swarm.
those freaky bear looking bugs?
Yeah, water bears.
Yeah,
Is that
the
what they're
water
called?
bears. Oh yeah, that's terrifying. No thanks.
I mean, they're also microscopic, though.
Yeah, but still, my dreams don't know that, Nikki.
Like those old horror movies. They're like, oh, it's a giant bug.
Yeah.
But they just like scale up a tardigrade, and it's just like just round soft friend coming after you.
Yeah.
Maybe the bear. There you go. Maybe that's how we do the Wild Fury. The bear doesn't get
Ooh.
shrunk. It's only the little friend, and then you're just like riding around on a water bear.
Yeah.
Here we go.
It's not a bad idea.
That's the
So that
next
would have to
stage
be like,
of button and bugs. We get shrink again. We're going down to microscopic scale.
yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Do some quantum mania action or whatever. I don't know. I never actually saw that movie, but Ant-Man, he keeps shrinking or something. I mean, goes down to the quantum realm or whatever that is.
No idea.
I would have to fake a lot of knowledge about biology. I would have to pull out words that have long been forgotten, like mitochondria and all of those.
Sure. Yeah, that's what the internet's for.
Take a little research, I suppose.
So, what's the future of the miniaturized community in the Gloomhaven lore? Like, we have this whole group of people that are, living in the walls and have made kingdoms for themselves.
Yeah.
They don't seem to want to grow again. They want to continue to live their miniaturized lives. What's the future of those communities for the other non Buttons and Bugs games?
Yeah, it's a good question. They might show up somewhere. I mean, I feel like it really is kind of localized, like across the street from the Crooked Bone, right? So, but I mean, I guess they could, yeah, I mean, they're maybe somebody got miniaturized and then, yeah, took a journey somewhere else. And
Yeah,
yeah,
they
just
could
will show
go
up
on some
somewhere as like,
voyages.
hey, I'm a tiny person. What's up?
They can
So,
just like set a raft on
I
the sewer line and set up a new colony of tiny people elsewhere in Gloomhaven.
I I wish I remembered who throughout, because I'd give them credit if I remembered someone had a cool idea for a class. I might have saw it on Reddit, and they were like, well, what if there was a class that didn't move on the hexes? It moved, it landed on like the intersection of the hexes. And then I thought, oh, well, we could bring a Buttons and Bugs character, and it would kind of zip around, and it would move, in the margins, and kind of, pew pew,
There you
yeah,
go.
chip away.
New character idea for a future Gloomhaven
Or
game.
maybe you can kit
You
out.
even
Maybe
just
they're,
have the tiny mini.
yeah, maybe it's an item. Maybe you can bring a Buttons and Bug character along as an item, and you can kind of deploy them.
yeah, could be a whole new ancestry. Tiny people. But yeah, I'm sure Satire, Alexander and Zach and Joe, I'm sure they've already been thinking about how to incorporate tiny people into, the events of the next game or whatever. They have a knack for coming up with interesting twists on all the lore. So
Mm-hmm. I'd like to see it. I think it'd be cool.
yeah.
They just got their own little world going on. Can they make contact with the larger world and just kind of like, all right, we're gonna section off a part of Gloomhaven. Isn't this part isn't Gloomhaven anymore. They're their own,
Do not
sovereign.
disturb. Yeah,
Well, this is all like in the
sovereign
sinking market,
community.
right? Where like it's largely abandoned anyway. So
I suppose that's true. The building across from the Crooked Bone seems to be abandoned already by the time
yeah.
of the story.
So yeah, becomes. I mean, it already is, right? Like its own kingdom that is separate from Gloomhaven itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You gotta wonder if any other of the, what are they, imps? The forest imps? Is that what Button is?
Yeah.
Any other imps decide to move in and try to take over some spaces? Because like people might not have realized this, but everyone else is shrunk. But that's just Button. Button's just that size. That's a forest imp.
yeah.
he's,
It's sort of,
he's a very large imp, but he's actually very small for
Mhm.
the average imp. Yeah.
That's right.
it's like those cute Australian animals you see that that you can hold in the palm of your hand. They're adorable, but like if they were big enough, they would kill you. But they're to us, they're just adorable. That's what these imps are. They would be ruling. They would be ruling this town if if they were big enough.
All right. Anything else we want to talk about? Or we can move on. Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, I don't think so. Looks like
Okay.
chat's dying down.
Yeah. Well, thank you both, Joe and Nikki, for coming on. I had a great time talking about all sorts of fun design things. I think it was a successful fireside chat. So yeah. I yeah. Thank you again. I guess I'm not sure what else I have to say. It appears my fire has died. Oh no, wait. It has low battery. It's still going for a little bit longer. The fire is waning. Yes, exactly. But yeah, I don't have anything else to say. So thank you so much for hanging out with us, and I guess I will see you again on Friday for another fireside chat. So enjoy the rest of your week, and yeah, that's it. I'm really good at being a stand-up MC here, right? So eloquent with my words. But anyway, have a good night, and I'll see you next time.